Welcome to Resiliency Within. I am your host, Elaine Miller-Karras. I also want to say I'm very grateful to the Trauma Resource Institute, the nonprofit that I founded almost 20 years ago, and they are the sponsor of the show. You can learn more about them by going to traumaresourceinstitute.com to learn about the good works that they do all over the world. You'll be hearing from them too at our break. I am so blessed today because my guest is Jenn Turner, and I want to welcome her to Resiliency Within. Welcome, Jenn.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, I want to say a little bit about you and what we're going to be talking about, and then we're going to get started. So, Jenn is from the Center for Trauma and Embodiment in Massachusetts. And I am hoping, I think we're going to have an energizing conversation about what it means to be a woman leader in the field of mind, body, health, and trauma healing. We're also going to explore the evolving landscape of therapeutic relationships, moving away from traditional hierarchies towards models of shared power, collaboration, mutual respect. Jenn brings deep insight into embodied trauma healing, helping us understand how the body holds our lived experiences and how healing must include and not bypass our physical sensations and inner awareness. So we're going to talk about interoceptive awareness, but I want to say a little bit more about Jenn. And these are her words. Jenn Turner has had the honor of working with survivors of trauma for all of her career, along with working in private practice as a trauma-informed therapist. Jenn is the executive director of the Center for Trauma and Embodiment, where she works to oversee training and supports the development of body first interventions for healing from trauma. Jenn also leads trainings in trauma center, trauma sensitive yoga throughout the United States and provides consultation to organizations on how to become more trauma informed at all levels. And she co founded the Center for Trauma and Embodiment in 2018. So, talk about woman leadership. It's never easy to, I think, start a nonprofit from scratch. We both have that in common, Jenn. So as we're getting started today, I'm just wondering, what's on your mind as we're getting started?
Yeah, I think a lot of what's been on my mind lately is around, what does it look like to lead? What does it look like to lead and decenter yourself? So it's not about a cult of personality, or it's not about like, I want to, learn from or be with Jen, but it's like, what's the mission? How do I move that forward? And what does that look like to be a leader but decenter myself, and share power. And yeah, that's been really on my mind a lot this week in particular, for some reason or another.
Well, maybe, and that's because I think it's a great thing for us to talk about because I have always also had that same philosophy. Because when we are in a leadership position, people do look up to us. But then when you're running an organization or you want to build a community worldwide, which is I think I've been so dedicated to, if you don't have that vista of how you share, and and also I think that involves a certain generosity at times as well, that we're not going to be, I don't think we're as successful as maybe carrying out what may be our mission and purpose in life. I don't know if you agree with that statement or not.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And in a way, I think what I have found as I've stepped into more leadership and grown in my career and gotten to a place where I felt ready to do that, um, I think what I've found so interesting is this challenge around um, stepping forward a little bit more and not kind of apologizing or not asking permission to share my opinion or direction that I might think anything should go. Anything from how we're creating a model to how we structure a training to partnerships. It's just my opinion. It doesn't have to be what we decide, but also to not hold back on that. I think that's been a really interesting learning edge for me. It's like you can say it. That doesn't mean you're saying it from an authoritarian perspective, but you are also sharing and being transparent about why you think we should go in this direction or why I think this partnership is actually going to undermine, our mission.
Well, and I think that having a voice is so important. And I think I can say from my own experience that there have been times in my life where I was told that my voice didn't matter.
Yeah.
And so when you have had that stated to you in multiple different ways, then, when do you speak out? And then sometimes it can be kind of shrouded in shame. Well, maybe when I have expressed my opinion, it hasn't been received well. And all those kinds of over, yeah, I guess overshadowing things that can happen And I think it happens in women in leadership, especially because no matter how much I like to say it, we live in a patriarchal world. And that patriarchy sometimes has guided how certain organizations live, even when they say they're not, that's the way that they're living in what they're embodying, but not in an explicit way, in an implicit way.
Yes, yes. And, in my mind, it's like so much of that is also around, how, you know, I perpetuate that, right? Like I perpetuate it because I've been indoctrinated in it as well. And so how do I continue to work at, shifting away from that patriarchal model and thinking even, the idea that of finding a solution, let's say that there's a problem, and I think for me, I really learned that in order to, growing up in a patriarchy, that I learned that, to find a solution, um, uh, or to offer a solution in leadership, you have to know the answer. You can't poll the audience. You can't ask people what their input is. You should know that's part of being a parent or an executive director and or even a therapist, right? It's like I should somehow have this all-knowing presence, which is has been really liberating to
Yeah.
throw that away and to find a new way to um, move forward as an organization that really brings in voices and wisdom of the people that we surround ourselves with, you
And
know?
that means, I think, that collaboration. That means that, yeah, I have a thought about that, but your opinion matters. And even though I have an opinion, even if I'm in a leadership position, it doesn't need to be the direction that we take, because maybe you'll convince me that there's another way to do it that I maybe haven't known about.
Yes,
So, but when we give the invitation for the opinion, I
yes,
think that that invitation is what's important.
exactly, exactly.
Well, this kind of leads me to one of the first questions I wanted to ask you is how did you get involved in this work? What's kind of your origin story?
Totally. I grew up in a very small community, actually in an island in the coast of Maine, and there was a lot of what I would now look back and call trauma happening around me. And in community, in my own home, in my family, and intergenerational trauma that was also sort of just like trickling in. Um, but I would just have called it like, life's tough.
Life. It's
Yeah,
life.
it's life. And um, I I grew up and part of, my family's routine was going to church on the weekends and I sang in church and at some point someone in the community was like, I'd like to teach you voice lessons. So she started teaching me voice lessons. It was something my family couldn't really afford, but she donated her time or basically, to mentor me. I ended up following that line with her mentorship and going to school to study singing actually. Um,
Which means you
and
probably have a pretty good voice.
I have,
Yeah,
it's all right.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
all
all right.
right. And um, I, so there was this moment when I was in a master class, which if anyone hasn't been in a master class, it's when you're sort of getting a private lesson, but it's on stage in front of an audience. So it's an interesting, somewhat vulnerable position. And this particular teacher that was leading me, I sang, and then she gave me feedback, and she said to me, "You're not in your body." And I remember looking down at my body and being like, I was like watching myself. I could see myself breathing. I'm like, I'm here. I was sort of trying to understand what she meant. And she said to me, go do some yoga and you'll figure it out. And that was this turning point in my path where I started doing yoga. And again, I wouldn't have called that trauma healing until many years later, but I began to feel like all the different like parts of my body and subsequently me began to come together and like move in harmony, move together. There was some kind of rhythm and it was a union, it was a joining, a coming together. Um, and so that led me down this path to then become a yoga teacher because, as it turns out, there's not a lot of employment for an opera singer in the United States. And it was just not my jam. Ultimately, it's like, um,
Can I ask you, do you still sing sometimes? Do you still?
Yeah, in the shower, in the car. But both my kids are singers for sure. So
Okay.
that's a big part of our life at
But so
home.
you, so that whole saying you're not in your body started a whole tributary, a whole pathway that you hadn't even thought of.
Yes. Yes. Amazing. And then went on to be a yoga teacher, was teaching yoga in studios and wanted something more. I was also teaching voice lessons at the same time, and I remember puzzling with some of my students around like the mental and emotional block they would have around singing. Sort of like what happens when you get in that higher register, your voice, you really get into the volume or the expansiveness of your voice. So I dove into, going back to school for to become a licensed mental health counselor. And during that time, I wanted to write a paper on trauma and yoga. And my professor was like, you're in Boston. There are people that are just starting this research at the trauma center. And so I joined that work when I was in school, kind of returning to my own education and training. And it was amazing. So it really influenced as I dove into that, my understanding of traditional therapy, sort of like always um, encapsulated in the body. And
So,
in,
so it
yeah.
really was that mind-body connection, which, I
Yes.
think this is really, I want to just say a few words about that because when you're talking about what was happening in the field of interventions for psychotherapists, most of the interventions were like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a cognitive approach, what we call psychodynamic, where you might look at the different ways that your psychology, is dynamically moving through how you live your life. Um, and even something like EMDR that I think has a body piece, it's not the same thing as when you say yoga and that embodiment of yoga. So it's a little bit different. There's a body scan, but it's not the same. So what you're talking about, and I want to mention, is kind of revolutionary work, is bringing yoga and the mental health field together. So I just want to say that to you, Jenn, because I do believe that's true. So I don't know if you have a comment on what I'm talking
Well, I
about or
appreciate that.
not. Yes, it is
You know, it,
revolutionary work.
and what's so interesting is when we first started this work, um, yoga, it was so, and even now still, it was like kind of like recreation or something that helps you to feel good. And what we really believe and then sort of had the hypothesis around was that, could this be the central line of treatment? Like, could someone come in and heal from trauma from yoga? It's not like yoga is this adjunctive thing. Maybe it's just adjunctive. So there's all this curiosity around it. And also, this continued curiosity that I have around, do we always have to use words to make meaning and to heal? And it is been so liberating. And the feedback that we've received through the years around like, as soon as we tell people, you don't have to talk about trauma here, it's like a weight off their shoulders, like, thank you, and it's not that we're afraid of stories or we can't hear them, but also that's not the entirety of who we are, and that's not the entirety of how we heal.
Well, and also I think that trauma survivors have told their stories so many times. And I've had people tell me, I would have to go, I know I'd have to just say, I'm going to go to bed for a week after I tell this story because everything gets activated inside of me where I can't function because I had to tell the story once again. And
Mm,
I think that when we start learning about those mechanisms, that when we tell the story, the body doesn't know the story's over.
mm,
So then the
mhm,
body starts to activate as if it's happening in the present moment.
mhm.
And then completely, we can get completely knocked off of living our life in the way that we want to live our life. So the fact that you invited people, which I've also said the same thing, well, you don't have to tell me a thing about what happened to you. We can work with the body. And even as if you're just even being here, if you can even just tell me what you're noticing right now inside, that's where that can be our starting point. And I mean, just like you, I've had people start to cry that they didn't have to cry, tears of relief that they didn't have to tell their story. And again, not to say we're here as holders of the story as well, but the choice, I think, Jenn, is what I love about what you said. You gave them the choice.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's it's a choice that I don't even know that I realized how important it was until we started offering it. And it was like this, um, it opened up this whole other line of exploration and learning about self when it didn't have to be immediately tied to, I'm a trauma survivor. I've experienced this. I've been through X. I'm actually just a person in the room with a body right now. And how do I meet that moment without needing it to be tied to story?
Yeah, and that there can be healing that comes from that. You know, there's another thing I want to mention, and is that I have before knowing about your work and the work that you do, I have clients that would take yoga and they go, "Oh, I can't take yoga because they get me in certain positions and I feel like the trauma is happening all over again in my body." Could you say a little bit about that? Because there may be listeners that have had that experience, but it hasn't been a trauma-informed yoga practice.
Yes,
So I
yes.
think it'd be really important to mention something about that.
I think the same way that we're talking about patriarchy and leadership and paternalism, it's like this idea that you're going to also go into a yoga class and somehow the yoga teacher is or practitioner is going to know what's right for your body, and guide you through things that you have to participate in. The reality is that most of us have what all of us have a deep well of knowing within our own body. And when there's not this set paradigm around choice and agency within a yoga space, we can potentially end up in shapes, positions where we want to get out of them and we don't feel supported in that. We feel like we have to stay. We want to please the yoga teacher. I've gotten called out in yoga sessions before for doing my own thing and listening to my body, not the instructor. Um, and what we try to do is really shift the paradigm around it being a self-led practice and a body, your own individual body-led practice. Sometimes somatic memories and flashbacks can still come up and surprise us, but when there is built-in choice, we get to move away from it. We get
What is
to,
it? Could you say something? Maybe people don't know what a somatic memory is. Could you say a
sure.
little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, so much of the traumatic experience is held in our implicit memory, which many, some of your listeners probably do know this, or maybe instinctually, but it's held in our memory in a place and in a way that doesn't have language or narrative or timeline. And it's really in the same place in our memory where we hold our ability to ride a bike or run and skip or do all of these procedural things with our bodies. And so when we're in a yoga space, we're often dropping out of cognitive, we're dropping out of our narrative, or we're dropping into implicit sensing and moving. So it does open the doorway. If you're not cautious and really know what you're doing, it does open the doorway for implicit memories to come in. So memories that are connected to trauma that maybe don't have language, that are, they might not be a clean narrative or a timeline, but are traumatic content, visuals, sensory experiences, sensations in our bodies. And how we meet that is through choice, agency, and continued opportunity to move through shapes. We're not holding them for a long time, so you're stuck or trapped anywhere.
Well, and I think that what you said is really important. There can be things that happen to us that we don't have a narrative around. Like before the age of 2 or 3, our explicit memory or factual memory isn't as well formed. So we may not remember the story about what happened to us, but our body remembers. And
Yes.
I think that when I first learned that, I go, oh my, so if something happened, if you were bitten by a dog at 1 and you had a certain reaction in the body, every time you see a dog when you're now 10, your body reacts as if you're going to get killed.
Yeah.
But of course, you're 10 and the dog is only like a little teeny chihuahua, right? It doesn't matter that it's a little teeny chihuahua. The body's reacting as if there's an existential threat. And that's what I think is when you mention the narrative. And that's what's so, I think, powerful about working with the body, because if that fear response comes in, and I would love for you to say a little bit about that. So, can you tell us about, what is trauma informed yoga? What is it that you would do differently than going to a class that's not trauma informed?
Sure, sure. So, our particular model, we've been doing this for almost 25 years now. And, our particular model is called TCTSY, and there's a large evidence base behind it, that continues to grow. Um, it's a specific approach that really leans on choice. So choice around how I move, when I move, if I move, along with what I'm being offered and guided around, around invitation, so that at me as a facilitator, that, if I'm facilitating you in trauma sensitive yoga, I'm inviting you. I'm not telling you what to do with your body. Um, it is interoception based. And so instead of it being kind of this external, like, oh, let's do this shape and our arm should look like this, or we should do, extend our arms overhead, or they should absolutely be at shoulder height. It's about, how does this feel in your body? What are you noticing? Not what does it look like? What sensations are you aware of, right? And so we're beginning to kind of drop into this place of, it's not a performance. It's not about looking good for your yoga teacher or doing it correctly. It's actually about, what does this feel like? How can you sense? Is this something you want to do more of or less of? Um,
It's a really respectful invitation. And the word interoception, we're talking about the body and the body's knowledge, right? And so we talk about that in the community resiliency model that many of you have heard about, and the trauma resiliency model, about body literacy, learning about how to read your nervous system. And your nervous system is unique to you. And so I love the way that you said that, because when you're asking to notice a sensation, if it's not pleasant, you don't need to continue to do it. And I think that for so many of us, when we've, of course, for all of us who've had trauma, this wasn't a choice. Trauma happened to us, right? And so the fact that choice is so integrated into what you're inviting people to do, I imagine for some people makes a huge difference in becoming a friend of their body, and not that their body is their enemy. Because I've talked to so many people that their body has been their enemy that they've lived with. I don't know if what your response is to that even word, because what I'm hearing you say is inviting you to become a friend and to learn about tracking and reading
it,
your nervous system.
exactly. So much. I love what you just said. And I think that, you know, we used to use this language of befriending your body as like, okay, we're inviting people in to do that. And then we started to have to back that up a little bit in terms of learning from participants that would come in to sessions with us and say, I don't even feel my body. So it's like, oh, okay, so first we're going to start with having a body. What's it like to have a body? And then from there, potentially moving toward befriending. But one thing that I'm like so passionate about is, a lot of times in much of the healing professions and opportunities that are out there, there's this expectation that we're going to come in with gratitude toward ourselves, self-love, some amount of self-care. And, what is it like to create an environment where someone can explore yoga or meditation or embodiment that doesn't require us to love ourselves, that actually welcomes the parts of ourselves that have self-loathing, that have felt betrayed by our bodies, and that those parts are welcome too, to be on the mat or be in the experience. And it's not a bypass around, let's like love up on ourselves, let's respect ourselves. It's like, then a lot of people who've experienced trauma will be like, this isn't for me. This isn't, I don't belong here. And I think that is always an interesting question that I don't always have the answer to, of what does it look like to create a space where someone's self-loathing is also welcome, in addition to,
Well,
like,
I think,
yeah,
well, I'm hearing you speak, though. I think this has to do with, because, the different things that happen to our body, like if we can't sense our body, I look at it in terms of biology, that it was a protection,
yes.
that your body automatically responded in this way of, let's say, being numb, because so many things happened. So there's a point where we're not planning to do this. Our body does this naturally, because the numbness doesn't, we don't experience the pain of what's happened to us. So
Mm,
I look at it as a protective factor, right? So this is the way your body protected you. So
yes.
even though you might say, well, it's not serving me now because now I'm having a hard time ever, I want to experience happiness, but I don't ever experience happiness because all I feel is numb and disconnected. So I think that there is a way of embracing the fact that this is a way that your body protected you, and also saying, but there also is the possibility of sensing your body and sensing the well-being that's in it by doing some different, not only thinking about it, but physically doing something different. I don't know if you agree with what I'm saying or not, but
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that in order to be able to feel the, the well-being and the potential for healing that's within our bodies, that often means we also have to feel the pain and the other things too. It's like we can't cherry pick our emotions or what we experience. So something that we also learned early on is that well-meaning clinicians would say, "Oh, go do yoga at the trauma center. You're going to feel better. You're going to feel more relaxed." And what was happening is people were just actually starting to feel more, which is, yes, relaxed, yes, at ease. Also, memories or terror or other things that they've had to numb against in order to live life.
to just get through life, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Someone told me, oh, this is the Pandora's box. It's like I went to do this, and all of a sudden, then every sensation was available to me, even the painful ones. And I don't know if I want to do that. I want to close the box. But
exactly.
that's why I always love the story of Pandora's box, because, the actual name was called Elpis. But people often don't know what was at the bottom of Pandora's box was hope. So, and to me, what you're doing in the work that you're doing is also hope. Anyway, another aspect of thinking about this.
Agreed. Agree. And, I always think too, like, how do I hold hope for clients and the people that I get to work with, even if they don't feel it. So it's also not apparent, like you don't have to feel hope in order to be here, but I'm holding a lot, and maybe I'll hold it on your behalf, or maybe I'll hold it and not have the expectation you feel it. But I don't think I could do this work if I didn't have so much hope.
Well, and of course, if you have so much hope that we can sense it from people, and I think those of us that have trauma, we have extra sensory abilities too, because we do learn to track others, even if we're sensing that numbness, if that makes sense of what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Well, and
Well,
so much of what you're saying there is that, which we can pick up, but like, is around if you're tracking me and I'm not showing up in a relationally safe way, then you're not going to be able to do interoception. It's not going to be safe enough to go within. And so you can do all the embodiment somatics you want, but if you're not tending to the relationship, it's a no-go,
yeah. And
or it's kind of stalls.
well, and it's so interesting. We need to take a break. I can't believe we
How
forgot.
did that happen?
Oh my God, I knew this was going to happen with us. We're going to take a short break. We'll come back. We have so much more to talk about. And it's obviously true that I'm hoping that you will come back for a part two, because we're not going to get to everything. I want your wisdom to share with our audience there,
I would
Jenn.
love to come back.
Okay, good. So we're going to take a short break, and we're going to hear from our sponsor, the Trauma Resource Institute. And I'll be back in just a few moments with Jenn Turner for a continuation of our discussion. Welcome back. I am here with Jenn Turner from the Center for Trauma and Embodiment, and I am enjoying this conversation so much. We obviously are kindred spirits about talking about the body, and I want to continue our discussion. And the one question I wanted to start out with, now that we're coming back from the break, is you talked about the evidence about the work that you do. And then lots of people are really interested in that. So what is the evidence about your trauma-informed yoga and what's it saying?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Sort of like quietly been building this big body of research that really, you know, TCTSY or yoga model is one of the most researched um, model. I'm not the researcher, so I'm going to sound a little bit clunky here, but like the most heavily researched kind of models for complex trauma treatment. So we have this, we've been sort of listed as part of the third wave psychotherapies in this recent, chapter in a book that was just so beautifully written. But we've done some research recently at the VA in the US and in Atlanta, and then another one out in the West Coast, looking at TCTSY or yoga model compared to CPT, cognitive processing therapy, which is really the gold standard in the VA system and in a lot of systems for treatment of trauma. And what we found is that our yoga model was as effective and that people were less likely to drop out of it, which is one of the biggest challenges, particularly in treatments that ask or require participants and people receiving the treatment to tell their story and to talk about what they've been through. Often we see if they can endure that part, but often it can be quite triggering. And they get to the end, there can be positive results. What we see with trauma sensitive yoga is that folks are able to stay, they yield positive results, and then they endure after, they last after they're done with treatment. So, one of the studies that we were able to do also was our original kind of NIH funded study looking at our model for treatment resistant PTSD. And so folks who had had the diagnosis for over 12 years or more, their incident trauma was as a child, so under the age of 12. And what we saw was that, almost 50% reduction in PTSD diagnosis, in depressive symptoms. We saw impact on dissociation, which is sort of incredibly challenging to treat. And then we did a follow-up study looking at like, okay, great, you did 10 weeks of yoga once a week. Now what? And what we found is that folks who continued to do yoga and what yoga looked like could be I'm at a traffic light and I feel my feet on the ground. Got a bunch of kids screaming in the back of the van. Feel my feet on the ground, feel my back against my seat, take 2 breaths, and then we're off. And that could be yoga, it could be going to classes that we offered at the center, but really seeing that these positive impacts that were yielded were able to stick, because that I think can be the most challenging bit is you're in intensive treatment, you're in community, you're in a study, great, you see some positive results. What happens after? And
Well, what you're telling me, which is similar to our community resiliency model, in fact, I could say that we would say grounding is exactly that, is that people have learned to adapt it to their activities of daily living.
mm,
It became a
yes,
practice that wasn't necessarily I have to be in a room with a yoga teacher to be in my car and feel my body in the seat of the car and bring my nervous system back into balance. I mean,
yes,
that is agency, isn't it?
exactly. Exactly.
Ah,
And and agency too is such a core component of the work I think that we both do is, the loss of agency that happens with trauma. And then that reclaiming or sometimes claiming for the first time my ability to have an impact not only on my external world, but my internal world, and like how transformational that is to be able to harness and discover that power within.
yes. I think that's what we see in the community resiliency model as well. It's like an awe moment. I actually just wrote an article for Psychology Today talking about the overview effect that the astronauts in space talk about, that when they see the Earth from space, they see this amazing globe and they don't see the separations of countries. So that our common humanity is something that they see, and they feel this sense of awe. And I thought, oh, that's exactly what you're talking about. And what I'm talking about is the sense of awe, the overview effect of understanding embodiment in a way that we can have this experience of agency and that discernment and choice about, again, what I don't know if you call it well-being, but that exists as well, that they can both exist side by side. But I love that idea of this overview effect that we can have.
Yeah, right. And isn't that also what we're in some amount on a smaller scale, maybe cultivating when we're doing these kind of mindfulness-based practices where we're getting to step outside of ourselves enough to kind of
Yes.
see, from that 30,000 foot view or use that metacognition in our, that medial prefrontal cortex where we get to reflect on what we're doing. We're not just doing it.
Well, so, and this kind of brings me to it's a little bit of a switch of conversation, but so important and connected, and that is, oh my goodness, we are living in a tough world right now. So many things are happening. I know I've certainly had a very difficult week. Because I really believe in having words of compassion and kindness and building, peaceful dialogue. And when we hear from from, leaders of our country in the way that this language is being conveyed, which is so disheartening, I'm really seeing a lot of distress in ways I've never seen it in my lifetime. So why is what you do important right now?
I think in particular, a couple of things come up for me. One is again that we don't have to make sense of anything or meaning of it in order to address how we feel in our bodies about it, what we're holding on to from a physiological perspective. Because, what wisdom can I offer as a practitioner right now? And I'm also astounded in and kind of reeling from what you're describing, right? It's like this is a new low of what we're seeing in terms of leadership and violence and hatred. And so I don't have anything. But what I do have is the ability to hold space, to witness, to invite you into a process of attuning to your own body and figuring out what you need and what's a resource to your body. Also, so there's that piece. I also think a lot about, core to our mission at the Center for Trauma and Embodiment is around redefining healing, meaning that we're bringing healing beyond, it can include, but beyond the clinical space. So out into the world in spaces where you can go to your gym, you can go to your yoga studio, your physical therapy office, and someone's going to meet you there with a trauma informed lens and perspective and offer you choice and offer you agency. And to me, we carry this pain, the burden of being human, of having gone through traumatic events everywhere we go. And what would it look like if we were met with opportunities for healing in
Mhm.
all of those places?
Or
To me, that's like there's so much possibility. And I get my hope back when I think about it that way.
Well, I'm being inspired by you right now, Jen. But because I think the other thing and question that I know you wanted to explore, which I think is somewhat connected to what we're talking about, is how can benevolent coercion undermine trauma healing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think it's connected.
Yeah. This is a sort of a concept that I'm always curious about, and I see it as a parent, as a therapist, all sorts of things where it's like we want and hope for the best for someone, and oftentimes that means that we think as a provider, as a parent, maybe a teacher, um, that we know what that person should do in order to access healing, to feel better, to feel relief. So what that means is that oftentimes we will, in the process of, if you just stopped smoking, if you just started having healthier relationships, we can coerce people to do things that they're actually not ready to do. We can coerce people to make choices based on, well, this is what's best. This is what's adaptive as opposed to maladaptive. Instead of coming at this, all of this work from a place of we all make choices about how we try to regulate ourselves. And some of them are more effective than others. Some of those that are really effective also have side effects and other impacts.
And can
But
be
that doesn't,
harmful.
yes, but that actually doesn't make them inherently bad. And it doesn't make you inherently bad as the person grasping at whatever the hell you can to try to help yourself feel better, feel relief, feel numb. And when we take the morality out of the work and start to begin to come at it with like full-hearted compassion, then it takes this like I need to pull you in a direction of healing. It's like if you're not ready and you are still in that I'll be next to you. We can do a little yoga and then you might go and get high after the session. And that's okay, actually. And to me, that's a shift from, well, if you're going to be healthy, you got to do this, this, and this. A lot of us aren't ready to be healthy. We're not ready to feel good. We don't feel deserving of it. One of the kind of core components of our yoga model is that, and when we think about relationships, is that if you look at attachment theory and the kind of wide realm of attachment theory and then complex trauma, you see that the impact around having these early childhood experiences or through the lifespan is that many people who have experienced trauma don't feel worthy of care. And so, how do you care for someone who doesn't feel they're worthy of it? Well, you got to not be too heavy handed, in my opinion. You have to come at it from a place of accepting people where they are and being willing to work with them where they are and not needing them to be somewhere that they're not.
Well, and this kind of brings us back to what we were talking about in the beginning of patriarchal ways of doing therapy. To me can have that benefit coercion I'm sorry, I can't say the word now.
Yeah,
Coercion,
yeah,
right? In
yeah.
that you need to do it this way if you're going to get better, and if you're not, you're being resistant, and maybe you shouldn't even come to see me
Right.
because you're being so resistant. And resistance to me, which I have to say I do not like at all, to me is a lack of readiness. And if you give people choice and room and space, well, this may be something you may want to try or not. I use the or not a lot because it may not be something that you choose to do right now. The
Yeah.
or not gives that agency and choice so that people can make that determination. We may say, oh, well, we know it would be better if you lost weight or if you didn't smoke and you'd be a healthier person. That all may be true. But the person may have no readiness to do that. And after working in healthcare for as long as I did, how many times did I hear physicians say, oh, they're just resistant. I'm not going to waste my time with that person anymore.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the way that I see the best healthcare working for folks, right? But I think that's so embedded in patriarchal systems of care.
Yeah. 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 And I think that exactly that, and that like resistance, that to me, I see that as like um, us, that's unwilling. Like when we come at it from that perspective, there's an unwillingness to actually listen to the reasons why someone isn't actually ready to do something, as opposed to I'm resisting what's right for me or good for me. It's like I may not be ready to be completely sober because I'm going to actually have to confront a lot more of my pain and suffering. So I'm not there yet. Or I'm not ready to lose weight and stop leaning on food in the way that I do because it's a way to numb my body and not feel it. And when I start to feel my body, it is that Pandora's box, and I'm not ready for that. Okay, great. That is really good information.
So it's a different way
Yeah,
of doing care in a way that has that understanding of that. And I think that would go so far in so many different systems of helping people not to leave an encounter with shame because I couldn't meet the expectations of the provider, the practitioner, the therapist, whoever that may be, that there is no way that I can possibly do that. Because, I can remember one time someone talking to one of my family members when they were having a challenge. They said, well, when that person asked you to do that, the person happened to be a quadriplegic. That's like someone telling me, Matthew, you have to climb those stairs. Well, maybe it would be good for me to get to the second floor, but there's no way on this God's earth I'm going to be able to climb those stairs.
right,
And
right.
sometimes we make those kinds of judgments. That really comes from sometimes our privilege in that case of being able-bodied to be able to go upstairs and not realizing, well, if you can't get up the stairs because you're a quadriplegic, then what do you do?
Yeah, Exactly. And then it becomes, you know, if we're talking about that old paradigm, it becomes more about what does Elaine want me to do as opposed to my healing journey, which may, and I think for me as a provider, it invites me into humility and curiosity. It's like I actually may not know the trajectory and what's going to be the right next step for my client or the person that I'm working with. So how can we figure this out together? How can we be curious together? And that can't really happen if I'm coming at it from a place of like, well, you got to do this, this, and this, and then we can start to heal. It's sort of like,
I love the way you just said the curiosity, because when you're saying, "Oh, we start with that aspect of curiosity," you're mirroring that curiosity and
yes,
that concept to your client who's saying, "Oh, maybe I can be curious. Well, no, I'm feeling numb. Oh, but maybe my toes right now. I can wiggle my toes and I like the sense of wiggling my toes." You know what I'm saying? It could be something little. It doesn't have to be big, does it? Have to be
right.
something big in terms of that change of becoming more embodied?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
All right. So I have a couple more questions that I
Yeah.
guess is that, and because we're talking about, a doctor, therapist, a practitioner, you know, why do you believe it's important for a provider to do their own embodied work if they're going to be working with others who are trying to heal their trauma?
I mean, well, I believe in embodied work on the whole. So, right, if someone's working on themselves, it's like in my mind, the body has to be a part of that, right? And so, if I'm a practitioner and I'm not doing my work, then someone else is going to have to do it for me. And that includes my body. And so, if I'm not tending to my body, then it's going to be in the room and someone else is going to have to metabolize it. One thing I think about as kind of the trauma paradigm in my mind is my body's dysregulated, I am dysregulated, and it's everyone else's problem to manage it. My anger, my volatility, whatever. So if we're trying to create something that is different, that's not the trauma paradigm, it's I'm going to take responsibility as an authority figure, as a person who holds power, which I am when I step in the room as a facilitator, as a practitioner. If I take responsibility for my body and you don't have to manage my nervous system, my regulation, I got it. Then that's not trauma. That creates enough space for you to have your own experience. But that's the kind of thing that requires ongoing practice. We can't check the box on that one. It's an ongoing, okay, what's going on in my body today? What's she holding here? How do I tend to it? And what are my supports and my mechanisms for tuning into that, doing that work? What happens when I get activated and I get numb or I push my body too hard? What are sort of the guardrails I have in place so that's not leaking over into my work?
Well, I think there's another thing that I've noticed too, is that it was really important for me to understand my body when especially when I had a really active private practice. Because when you become an embodied practitioner, is that you pick up things in your body that are not yours. That might sound strange to some people, but basically, if you're in that relationship, those mirror neurons, I believe, is part of it. You're in that sensory space. And so I can remember one time just feeling such pain in my back. And I knew it wasn't my pain in my back because I knew my body, right? And so I just said, I said to the client, "I'm just wondering if you're noticing anything in your upper torso right now." They said, "Oh, I have this terrible pain in my back," right? So it was their pain. But I didn't, you see the way I asked it too. I didn't say, "Oh, you have that pain in your back, right?" No, I didn't say it that way. I'm just wondering if you're noticing anything because it could be wrong. And when you can have that attunement with a client and they go, "Oh, how did you know to ask me that question?" I will tell them, "Well, there's this thing that happens between two nervous systems that we oftentimes, when we're in alignment, can pick up the suffering of others, not only what they may be feeling, but what they may be sensing in their body." And I think this is, this is kind of a connected question, is that I've noticed that when I became an embodied therapist, that those relationships were expanded in a way that accelerated the attunement.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I don't, we want to speak to that a little bit.
Well, to me, part of that is also, or I guess what's coming up for me is thinking about this like shared authentic experience. So that's another thing that we sort of like to talk a lot about and wonder about is, what's it like when you're a practitioner or a community leader, you're leading something and you're practicing alongside the people that you're serving. So you're not watching them, you're not monitoring them, making sure they're adhering to something. It's like a parallel play. You're dropping into your body, they're dropping into their body, and that's highly relational in my mind,
Very relational.
right? It's
Yes.
different than the kind of relational we might think where we're looking at each, talking, gazing, but it's incredibly relational. And that from that place, there's so much healing possibility that we don't always get to access when we're looking at each other and like focused on each other. How different that can be when we're having a shared experience and can connect in that kind of parallel way, um, and how that can deepen connection as we attune to one another.
And especially I think when if we're working with people that have had childhood trauma where they had a misattunement with their parent, that if we can attune to them, and we, again, I'm not going to say I've been perfect at it because I haven't been, but that if we can do that and we really practice it, then that attunement that happens maybe the first time in that client's life that anybody attuned with them in that sensory way, that
Yes.
really can be life altering. And
Yes,
I mean, I imagine you've seen that as well.
absolutely. And I think that, it's probably something we can explore more. I think in a way, as a community, we've always been like, we don't want to be in this place of we're trying to offer corrective experiences, and because that there's something about that also feels so paternalistic and sort of like I'm going to show you the right way to be in relationship. And there is something undoubtedly impactful that you're describing about being in relationship in this way where there is that attunement, where there is that dance that happens that many of us missed out on or was wildly inconsistent.
Yeah. Well, I just love, Jen, the work that you're doing in the world. And I mean, I think I have about 300 questions I want to ask you. But I guess this next one has to do with, I know that you're about to have your conference that you have every year. And one of the things that you shared with me that I felt really so grateful to you, and that is that you try to give voice to people that are doing wonderful work in the field that are not necessarily the ones that have the bigger stages.
Right.
And could you say a little bit about just even your thinking about that? Because I mean, I guess in my estimation, it has to do with you being a leader and being a woman. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but go ahead.
You're onto something there.
So maybe I'm onto something here. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. There are so many. There's a long backstory. Maybe I'll save you from at this moment. But in terms of working in this field for quite some time now and seeing kind of the same voices that are often, you know, white male psychiatric medical providers that are sharing about the latest approaches to treatment, we miss out on the richness of and the depth of work that is happening in the world, on a grassroots level, on a community-based level, that brings in creative methods of healing that involve being in nature and green space, connecting to ancestral lines, how we feed ourselves, and that are doing this in community in live time that bring such wonderful insight. So it's always been our project at the center, and deeply passionate mine along with my co-founder David Emerson, we've to center other voices, to center other voices that don't often get a platform or maybe less of one, so that we can learn from these providers that are doing this incredibly innovative work and also be challenged around the norms of what we imagine trauma treatment to look like and to be.
Well, I'm going to go back to kind of like the overview effect because I think I see the broadening of that and awe. We only have a couple minutes left, and I just want to say to my audience, I hope that you can see that Jenn Turner and the center is really what else is true in the world of embodiment and healing and choice. But also, I want to give you, a final word. Is there something that you would like to say to the audience in your final words, and also let people know how to get in touch with you if they want to know more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of ways to be in community with us. Everything from, we offer trainings. We also have roundtables that are free, that are ongoing, ways that you can engage and learn more about the wide range of work we do. Um, and, you know, um, last word, I guess, to really be in touch. There's always so much more to say, but if folks want to learn more, they can go to healwithcfte.org. And from there can find all kinds of things about our trainings, our podcast, our conference, and our different models of care, including trauma-informed weightlifting, trauma-sensitive yoga.
I need to know about trauma informed weightlifting because I weightlift now. So I'm going to have to maybe take that one. So, but say it one more time slowly.
Healwithcfte.org.
Heal with C.
FTE. So Center for Trauma and Embodiment,
Okay. Okay.
CFTE.org.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure we got that. So, Jenn Turner, a deep bow to you and all the work that you are doing with your co-founder and what has happened since then. So we're going to have you come back and talk about the future and some of these other training models that you have so we can give that
Beautiful.
expanded lens to our audience of how else they can really come to the center. And you offer things online. It's not all in person. So
Exactly.
you don't have to go to
Exactly.
Boston in order to do this, right? You can.
Exactly. Things are virtual. We have trainers all over the world that are doing this work. So
Lovely. So a deep bow to you, and again to take a deep listen. I hope that you have done that this in this last hour, and to remember what else is true. And remember, you can start to be curious about the body. And if you are again noticing that you're sensing, oh, it's just numb, that's a starting point to even noticing the numb of what else might be able to be true for you. So this is Elaine Miller Kara signing off for Resiliency Within. Until next week.